So, traumatized persons, trigger warning. Anyways, so this topic is about traumatized people and the way their memory works, okay? It's not linear. And we cannot access our memories as easily as people who do not have as much trauma. And this can take one singular traumatic event, or it can take multiple traumatic events to get you to this point. However, a lot of people get frustrated with me because it's like, well, why can you remember in these situations or those? Because trauma is like that. It stores the memory in those ways. And for individuals like myself, things like driving long distances, whether it's only like half an hour or 45 minutes, is enough time to get you out of the go for your mind to be able to relax enough for memories to start to arise. And I want to talk about a situation that I was in this summer where I couldn't report people who were clearly abusing their children for safety reasons because I was living and am living in my car. And, you know, there was a lot of signs that these people were doing illegal shit at a state park. And instead of the people arresting them as they're getting drunk and doing drugs at a state park and neglecting their children, you know, they allow these people to continue to do shit like this. And my cousin was trying to pull information, and he's like, well, did it remind you of this, or did it? No. Yes, it reminded me of my family situation, which I think is part of the reason, and we'll just call it the universe was trying to remind me of shitty ass family situations so that they could be processed. But that's not the way trauma is processed. On the contrary, it just makes me more furious that family members try to normalize the abuse that we sustained under my parents' care. And so, yes, my dad would take us to the lake so that he could do stupid shit and whatever. However, we knew this, so we stayed. At least in my particular case, it's why I would wander off and go lizard hunting or snake hunting and bring snakes home, because I would spend most of the time wandering so that I wasn't around my father, who was drinking and acting a fool. However, I try to share the story of how this man was pinching his daughter's nipples after she had gotten severely sunburned from not wearing a shirt in summer heat. And sure, you're at the lake, but sunburns can be very serious, especially once you get to the point where the skin on your nipple is not only flaking off, but it's starting to blister. So it's not necessarily sexual abuse, and that's where it gets confusing, because you have a child who is going to confuse these interactions in the future when they're trying to decipher what really happened to them, because these were very gaslighty parents. Gaslighting up the wazoo, and then shutting their children down when they would question anything. Any of their behavior, like, you're being too sensitive and da-da-da-da-da. No, she fucking isn't. And I made it very clear to him, no, she fucking isn't. And I gave her some cream for her nipples, you know. But this is something that the parents, I asked the mother if I could give her the cream so that she could put it on her daughter, and that's what they did. I didn't put it on her directly. However, in my experience, it wasn't my father who confused that for me. It was my mother. And I understand people flocking around my mother trying to defend it, but anytime we try to get clarity on situations like this, we were shut down and told we were wrong for our curiosity. Okay? And it was something that I've written in my book several times, and I've written poetry about it, how it really confuses you about boundaries and who can touch you and who cannot touch you. Because essentially, when I was about 4 or 5 years old, my nipple was secreting what seemed like dry milk, okay? Like cheese almost. And so I showed it to my mom, and then my mom started pulling my shirt up in front of people to show them. And the more I would tell her that I didn't want to, she would tell me not to be ashamed because these were people in our family. Understand that a lot of sexual abuse comes from people in the family. That's what my mother doesn't seem to understand. That she was setting me up to not be able to talk about the discomfort because I was telling her I was uncomfortable with what she was doing. And she was telling me, no, you are not. Let me do this to you and humiliate you in front of everybody. And you need to shut the fuck up because I'm curious about this. And I just want to be showing you off. That's where people don't seem to understand. We knew the danger of my father. So honestly, yes, my dad had a lot of abusive situations when he was not sober. But we knew that danger. Okay, we knew that danger, and as confusing as it was, when my father was not sober, my twin brother and I did the most effort to try to stay out of his way. And that, that's as good as we could get, because essentially my older siblings were not present to defend us from our parents. And, they had gotten out, and that's fine. So, again, we go back to that confusion. Was it sexual assault? No. Did it make me sexually uncomfortable and when I asked questions got shut down? Yes. That is where the confusion lies. It has nothing to do with me believing that my mother sexually assaulted me. I even told her, you sexually assaulted me by proxy. By proxy. Because you were always examining me and having strangers examine me without my consent or permission. It's the same thing that Polinsky did to us when they took us to foster care. They examined us without our permission. They examined body parts that we were not used to having examined without our permission or our consent. I don't give a fuck if you have government consent. I don't give a fuck if you have parental consent. When y'all start doing shit like that, you take all autonomy away from the kids. And I completely understand that, it needed to be done so the court could do this. There's no evidence that proves that you can show that a child is newbie, which means a virgin or not, just by doing a physical exam. So obviously the physical exam wasn't for that. The physical exam was to ensure that there wasn't abuse in the household. Any signs of abuse at that moment that it was reported. Totally get it. I understand why you had to do it. But after doing it, the foster care system, after returning us to our parents, should have obligated parents to keep us in therapy and counseling after that to ensure that there wasn't any aftermath from that non-consensual action that the government did to us. Now, I understand that by itself may have not caused trauma if there wouldn't have been other trauma in the household. I completely understand that. And this is why for a lot of individuals, things like this don't arise back in our memory until new assault as an adult. This is what I tried to explain to my mom so many fucking times and she just didn't want to hear it. Once I was assaulted as a full-grown fucking adult working on my spiritual journey and trying to take accountability for my entire fucking life, once I got assaulted as an adult, that's when all these memories and patterns started to arise of why it was so easy for me to ignore red flags and put myself in dangerous situations because my mother told me not to be ashamed or embarrassed about doing certain things. The school tells you not to be ashamed and embarrassed about getting dressed in front of certain people. But even people of your same sex can be the ones who set you up for assault, which is what happened to me. A friend set me up to be assaulted. And this is what I mean, that some of you women are not safe people. You are unsafe individuals. Very unsafe women to be around as women, but also men to be around as men. Not only because you harm each other, but you will harm anybody who fucks with your status quo. you assault by proxy. Even if you are not the person who is committing the assault, you assault by proxy. You are either an enabler or an inhibitor, which means that you actually set people up to be harmed in this way. And then you complain about people playing the victim or being victims of this assault and not being able to function long term later on in life. Not understanding that all of those continuous experiences over and over and over again break a person. And I'm not saying that people are permanently broken or that you can't get over things like this. But just because you were able to find balance in your life and get over it, you cannot judge another person's journey based on your experience, because you don't know how their experience affected them and how those memories are going to be more and more like intrusive thoughts and flashbacks for that individual going back to childhood, not because it was sexual assault. That's what I have tried to explain to my family. You cannot keep treating me this way, not because I'm accusing you of these things, but because now that I have this adult assault, my brain is confusing these things. And I am asking you for space to process it if you are not going to let me talk to you about it, which is exactly what my mother did, which was shut it down, did not want me to have conversations, did not want me talking about my childhood experiences. And the thing is that some of these things needed to be discussed. Like, why would you do that to me? All I wanted to know is why. All I wanted to do is tell my mom, hey, you know what? These things hurt me, Mom. When you took me to the doctor in Mexico to prove blah, 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 blah to the school so that they wouldn't take you from me, or I mean me from you, when I was in middle school, that was way after the previous foster care and blah, 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 that affected me in this way. But she didn't want to have that conversation. She doesn't want to have that conversation. Neither do a lot of family members. They don't want to have that conversation because they have to admit to their bullshit. My cousin would have to admit that she knew that her brother was trying to assault me the day of my sister's wedding when she saved me from him. She would have to admit that she did not report it. She would have to admit that she did not tell the mothers of the family, because if she would have, he would have never been welcomed back into the family before he died. I couldn't say anything because if I did, and even if she would have, that could have led to his death. That was my fear, that my older brother would take retaliation and kill this person. And that's what I mean. These are the type of situations that if I would have ratted him out and something tragic would have happened, then I would have been at fault regardless. So regardless, it falls upon the victim, because family units do not put a stop to male inappropriate behavior, but it also comes from females. This is what I'm trying to say. It doesn't just come from males. I've been put in extremely uncomfortable situations and dangerous situations, not only sexually dangerous, but also physically, mentally, emotionally, and psychologically dangerous by females just as much as males. Why? Because I was conditioned this way. And those confusing things as a child that I wanted to talk about, that she refused to let me talk about, are the things that for an autistic or an ADHDer or a neurodivergent in any form, just because they have PTSD, that's a form of neurodivergence. At that point, when you reach the fracturing of PTSD or CPTSD, that fracturing requires a lot of detailed conversating. And if your body never feels safe to be able to talk about these things, when you are in the presence of these individuals, your body will go into shutdown, it will go into freeze, it will go into inaction, into fawning, to be able to stay safe around those individuals. So it's not about, blame or no blame or whatever the case may be, or taking action and suing these individuals, which is essentially the only way to get any city to actually listen about what's going on in these families or in our foster care system. You would have to sue. You would have to go through the legal process and be mangled by the legal process. Because for most of us, because our memory is fractured, it comes in bits and pieces. And it's not because the story is changing. It's because once the body feels safe enough to release that part of the story, and it continues, and it has continuous safety, it releases more and more of the story as the safety is provided for it to remember these things. Forcing a person to relive their trauma, to give them an opportunity to process it, is reactive. It's reactive processing, and I don't agree with it. I never have, and I don't understand why people do it that way. Because that further trauma has caused a lot more chronic conditions in my body to be flared up. And these autoimmune disorders are hard to maintain when people are consistently flaring them up, because there's no way to get away. And it's not agoraphobia. When people are consistently harming you in this way, it's not agoraphobia. You cannot, again, you're pathologizing the person and you think you're helping them, but there needs to be a name that doesn't pathologize them. Because the moment you put agoraphobia, people think that you're just afraid to go out in the world because you're like monk. You know, you're like afraid of germs and you don't want to get germs on you. And yes, in definition, it would be agoraphobia, because you're afraid to leave because you've been harmed, and you continuously be harmed when you leave the house. However, when there's evidence of continuous harm, by placing the label on the harmed, you also place the burden of evidence, you put the burden of choice, you put the burden of healing, you put all of the burdens on the person who is being harmed, and none on the people who are harming, because society has normalized all of these harms. Society has normalized leaving children with people whom you know are drug addicts, knowing that you are putting our lives in danger if we report said drug addicts. Because if I would have reported the tweakers this summer, I'm the one who would have gotten in trouble, even though there was plenty of witnesses to what was being done to these children. And all I could do was give them advice to hopefully survive. Hopefully survive. Because they were on my ass for several days. So if I would have reported it, they would have known it was me. And that could have meant my harm or my death. You guys in position of authority allowing it. Court systems allowing it. Why? Because it's convenient to you to use these people to try to get information out of other people instead of saving those children. Because why not have another generation of broken children that you can use in this manner for future generations of children? Oh, we can't save these, so let's fuck them up as much as we can so we can save the ones we can, so that we can use this couple to weed out the individuals who are inflicting and living abuse. Because the court systems know exactly what the fuck they're doing. And it's not protecting children. So please, with these mentalities, with these closed off mentalities, when your children come to talk to you, it's an opportunity to process. If your child develops CPTSD or PTSD, that is something to be taken seriously from the initial point. Not to be ignored as, oh, she's having another crazy episode. No, if she is trying, or he is trying to talk to you about things, it's because they still care about the relationship and they want to fix it. Once they stop talking, that's when you should be worried, because you have lost a relationship. You have lost a relationship with a person with PTSD because they can no longer live in your world. They can no longer mask what has been done to them. And they can no longer be in family units or in societal units that are exhibiting this behavior. And it's not just because it's triggering. Because people are like, well, I'm triggered, I can't be here. No, it's not just because it's triggering. It's because they understand the aftermath of that abuse, and it's infuriating. It's infuriating that you can't hold these adults accountable for harming children. Because these parents were reported previously by their daughter, and they still had these innocent minors in the household after being reported by their eldest daughter, which is ridiculous how the court systems will allow the harm to continue by alcoholic and drug addict parents. So I really, really do encourage, and it's not saying that I don't believe that people with drug addictions and alcoholism shouldn't get the opportunity to get their children back. I completely understand that, but when you have somebody who is constantly relapsing into addiction, 6 months or 1 year of proving that they're out of addiction is not enough to give a child a stable life. And for you to force that child to live through that instability is guaranteeing that that child will live a terrible life. And families do it all the time. They will take children, and as soon as the parents convince them that they're okay, they will hand the children back to these irresponsible parents. Why? Because you want to believe that things are better, knowing how these adults are. And it goes both ways in accountability. But if you don't allow your children to talk to you about them, you will lose your children. Because we need to be able to be freely discussing these topics. They are not taboo. And like I said, I understand the difference of what was being done to me. I understand my mom was not sexually assaulting me, but she was making me feel uncomfortable and making me feel like I had no autonomy over my body, like I couldn't say no. So when future things happen, including her taking me down to TJ to be furtherly examined by a doctor years later, all of that registered in my brain as unconsensual examination and touching and assault of my body, which it was. It was 100%. It was unconsensual because you had groomed me into believing that I couldn't say no. Because all the other times I would try to say no, including when she was ripping my clothing in front of my entire family and laughing about it because it had a little hole in it, you were teaching me that I had no consent over my body and that you would use shame and embarrassment to manipulate me into doing what you wanted me to do. And the fact that you sit here believing that you did not break my brain and trying to blame it all on my broken father. Yes, he was broken, but you brought him into the house. And then held it over us about the sacrifice that you made bringing him back into the house. When it was not our choice. You did not make that sacrifice for us. The sacrifice would have been dealing with your children, asking questions about their father when you made the decision to stay away from their father, who was harming you and them. You don't get to claim sacrifice because you stayed with an abuser. That's what's so frustrating about mothers and fathers like this, because then they claim the sacrifice and then they use that sacrifice to manipulate their children so that they won't judge the father or mother for staying for the abuser, with the abuser. But I'm upset with both of my parents for that. Because yes, my father was a drug addict, but my mom knowingly let him back in the home. And then knowingly held that over our head as a sacrifice. So we weren't allowed to talk about what was happening to us. Because it was our fault that it was happening to us. We believed that it was our fault. And no matter how much we try to talk about it as an adult so that we don't have to carry this anymore, and hopefully so my mom can heal from the traumas of what has happened, because it's beneficial for all of us to heal so we can actually develop a relationship, it's closed down, shut down, and said no. And I always use my story as an example that I am not reproaching my mother. I am not holding this against her. One day she will want to talk about it, and hopefully it won't be on her deathbed. However, the only way I could free myself from all of this bullshit was to go no contact or minimal contact with the majority of my family members who enjoy enjoy defending abusers like, oh, they did their best. No, if they would have done their best, they would be okay with talking about it. But they know they did wrong. You know you did wrong, and you don't want to talk about it because you are holding yourself, like you're holding it against yourself. You can't forgive yourself for the wrong that you did. So now you want to shut down anybody who wants to talk about their experience. Not because it didn't happen, but because you don't want to hear or feel like you did anything wrong. But if you truly were doing your best, then talking about it shouldn't affect you. You should want to talk to your children like, oh my God, if I would have known that this was going to happen. That little bit of validation can change a young adult's life. Instead of waiting until they're elderly to fucking fix some of these things. And some of y'all don't even fix them in elder years. These monarchs and patriarchs of the family die without ever facing accountability because you guys would rather lie about your experiences than ever bring them up, because that false sense of peace and that false sense of family unity and camaraderie is more important to you than actually facing these things, even though facing these things is what actually builds a strong foundation for the future, because then it can't be used to dismantle the relationship by anyone on the outside or anyone on the inside of the relationship, because it's built on truth, respect, acceptance of differences. But no, instead we build these relationships on criticism and holding shit against each other and shit like that. So when somebody tries to talk about their experience, you directly feel like you're being criticized, because that's what you do. You criticize. You directly feel like you're being attacked and like your secrets are being used against you, because that's exactly what you do to other people. And we can't build a foundation as a society. We can't build a foundation as family, but we cannot build a foundation as a society if we are not willing to face those factors. And if we are not willing to remove child abusers. And I'm not just talking about pedophiles, okay? Child abusers include mothers who criticize their children until their confidence is gone. It includes fathers who criticize their children until their confidence is gone. It includes theus who criticize other people's children until their confidence is gone, just because they're adults that are too immature. But because my mother is immature, she surrounded herself with her siblings that were immature. And now I know this for a fact, that she kept us away from theas that would have questioned her way of living. Why? Because she was always criticizing all other people, and she didn't want to be criticized for the shit that she did. So let's get real about the things that are happening in our families if we want to build a stronger generation of children who are not needing to dismantle all of this critical harm prior to being adults. Because essentially, we are permitting it within our own family. The example right now is the Trumpers. So keep that in mind and have a beautiful day, because sexual confusion and lack of consent can cause a lot of physical, and I'm just talking about from the point of view of somebody with severe CPTSD and PTSD, where you actually get flashbacks that are physical flashbacks. Like, you can actually feel people touching your body. You can feel people, doing things to your body. And the thing is that, like I said, I know what my mom did was not sexual, which was pressing my nipple in front of a lot of people at my house, a lot of adults in my house. I know what she did wasn't sexual. I know that. It was my mother's curiosity and immaturity that made her do that, despite people telling her that I was embarrassed and I didn't want to be doing that. Instead, she told me not to be embarrassed and that this was family, putting me at risk of being abused by family members. That is where the problem is, because now you've confused a 4 or 5-year-old into believing that family members can touch them without their permission. That is called grooming. And it may have not been intentional grooming, but that is what grooming is. Every time she ripped my clothing in front of my entire family. That is called grooming. That is called shaming. And as much as these people thought that they were just playing games and kidding and blah, 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 all of those jokes destroy a child's confidence. And it took them decades to destroy mine, in spite of everything that I overcome as a child. It still took them continuing said abuse as an adult, even after being told that it was harmful, continuing said abuse into adulthood until they broke me. So just keep that in mind, because we shun one type of abuse away, and we don't even shun it completely, because we keep inviting these pedophiles into the family gatherings and stuff like that. But also these types of abuse by mothers, aunties, cousins, and so on and so forth. Because in every single one of those situations, there was adult cousins present that could have defended me. And instead, they were laughing their asses off as much as my mother was while she was harming me. And now try to pretend like I was just too sensitive. I was not too sensitive. You should never be ripping the clothing off of an 8-year-old because it had a little hole, and you were mad that your child would not get rid of a pair of pants after they had a little hole in them, because you thought it made you look poor, but you didn't stop to think about your child's comfort and sensory issues, and how when we have sensory issues and a piece of clothing is comfortable, we don't get rid of our clothing. My auntie taught me to patch it up so my mom wouldn't keep ripping it off of me. And even then, my mother would get mad that I was always patching my clothing on because she didn't want to look poor. And these are all concepts that build off of each other, because this would happen if I borrowed clothing from friends and stuff like that. My mom would get upset. Like, oh, don't I give you everything, blah, blah, blah. Why do you got to be borrowing to be able, but makes us you know? So even if friends gave me gifts, my mom would make me return my gifts, and she would buy me the same things or similar things, even when they were not my size. Because she often bought me things as replacements for what she made me return that my friends gave me. And they were never my size. The shoes were usually a size too big. The shirts were usually a size too big, and so on and so forth. And I get that some people don't want to see that as abuse, but that is abuse. It breaks a child's confidence. So really change your perspectives about how your behavior with your children harms them. And if you believe the whole do as I say, not as I do is not harmful, then you're very confused about what lasting harm is. You're very confused about what the grooming you did to your child will look like until your children start getting abused by other people. And it's also harmful when you continuously side with the abusers because you don't want to face all of the ways that you were abusive. And I'm using that word very freely because I know that a lot of people do not want to use abuse because they have normalized behaviors that are abusive, but they have normalized them as joking around or kidding, when I have repeatedly told you these are not ways to joke around or kid with each other. So just keep that in mind. I love you and have a beautiful day.